It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. Now, you can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting if you just email me directly at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. Now, I was contacted by Richard Kerr. You might remember Richard Kerr, the Irish fellow that was involved with that whole Concora school for boys. And the main part about his story is that he was sex trafficked as a little boy by Roy Cohen, okay, the attorney from New York City. In fact, Donald Trump's attorney. So Richard Kerr put me in touch with this lovely woman here. Her name is Casey Gates, and she's got an incredible story about these prisons, a prison system in Australia where they used to lock up these homosexuals. So Casey Gates, are you there?
Yes, I am. Hello, Ed.
Thank you so much for coming on the show, Casey.
Mm-hmm.
Before we get into the whole story about Australia and these prisons and stuff like that, tell us about yourself. Who is Casey Gates?
Well, I'll say I'm a female, hence the name Casey, can be confused. I'm in my early 60s. I'm a mother and a grandmother, and I was born in Australia, and I'm now residing in America. I have been for the last 22 years.
What do you like better? Because I have an ex-girlfriend who's from Australia.
Oh, how do you mean, what do I like better?
Yeah, do you like the U.S. better or Australia? What did you like better?
I love America. It's my home. It has been for 22 years. I only miss the wildlife.
Right. Yeah, I can imagine, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, with this thing about these homosexual prisons in Australia, how did you become involved in this?
Okay, so back in 2000, I helped jail my father, and he went to prison. And over the course of the last 20-odd years, I've been digging deeper into our family and what's happened, what led me to get to here. And I found out my father was an inmate in that jail back in the late 50s, early 60s.
So now you say you helped jail your father. What was his offense?
He was a child molester.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So and then how did you help get him arrested?
Well, he interfered with his grandson and many other children, and he was brought to justice.
And you're the one who actually turned him in?
Yes.
That must have been an incredibly difficult thing to do.
It was. It devastated my life. It ruined my life. Hence why I'm in America. I got a second chance at life.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. Right, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
So now, since he was in prison, did you ever have any more contact with him?
I did in the last. He was released, and because he was dying, and he had 12 months left, and he did reach out to me, and I did speak to him in that last 12 months on and off. Yes. And
what was that like? I suppose you could never forgive, but then again, he is your father,
Yeah. Unfortunately, I always had my dad on a pedestal.
Yeah.
And I thought he was the greatest thing that God had ever given me, for a dad. And when I found out the other side of his double life that he was living, I was just totally devastated, as I said. We spoke. There was a little bit of reluctancy there from him sometimes, I guess, he did say to me he didn't think I had it in me to do such a thing, to put him in jail, because everybody else had never made him accountable. And it took his own daughter to do that.
Did you have to go to court and testify?
No, didn't have to testify. It was all done. My son didn't have to. He testified, but he didn't have to go into a courtroom with him.
Is that because he pled guilty or he went to trial?
Yes, he pled guilty. He pled guilty to all the charges.
And how many years did he get? What was the sentence?
He got 9.5 years, I believe, roughly.
Yeah, incredible. You know, you see, so many times you'll see these comments on social media saying, child molesters should get the death penalty, you know? And because people think they're getting 30, 40 years. But the average sentence for a child molester, a child rapist, the average sentence is 8 years, and they only serve 3.5 years of an 8-year sentence. It's just outrageous.
Yeah, that's the problem. And, you know, when I went back in history and I looked at, you know, just prior to my birth and after my birth, and then when I was like 7 and 8 years of age, he'd already been to jail 2 to 3 times, and he'd reoffended each time. And he was put into this said jail in Cooma in Australia, and it was supposed to be for homosexuals. And here is my father being put in the same jail, and he's actually a perpetrator.
Well, what were the previous charges?
The same thing.
Really?
Child molestation.
And you weren't aware of this?
No. And the funny thing about it was he wasn't an Australian citizen. He hadn't been naturalised. He should have been deported the first time that this happened. And even if he hadn't have been, like, on that first time, he should have been deported on the second.
Well, absolutely. And what was the length of those other 2 sentences?
Offhand, it's only a few years, not maybe 2-3 years.
That's outrageous. And so then what about, like, your mother or your uncles, your cousins? No one warned you, said, hey, you know, your father's been convicted of this several times. Keep your family away from it?
No, it was all covered up.
Just incredible.
Yeah. And that's why it was very traumatic for me to have to find out all this, thinking that, you know, like I said, I had my dad on a pedestal. He was my best friend. He was a good dad towards me that I fought. And when I had to find out this stuff slowly, and even since he's passed away, I found out a lot more. But he's not here to talk to anymore. So, unfortunately, there's a lot of questions that will go unanswered for me.
Because there were other victims besides his family members?
Yeah. Oh, many. Hundreds of victims. Yeah.
And how is this? Because he worked at a school or something? How did he get access to so many children?
He did have access to children's homes. He managed service stations, and back in the day, you know, the 60s and the 70s, they hired young boys to do the driveway service, you know, to fill your tank and do your windscreen and oil change, you know, whatever needed to be done. It was a little bit different, the service. And they hired young boys, and I guess these young boys came from home. And, yeah, he got involved in a pedophile ring when he was released from jail. And some of them were involved in disabled, working for the disabled, busing them to and from venues. And another one was a school teacher in a Catholic boys' college, and so on. So they had their different connections in that ring.
So all of his crimes involved males, no females?
Only boys.
Only boys. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so then so now I had never heard of this until you sent me that link. I had never heard that the people were in Australia, people were put in prison for the crime of homosexuality. Is that what it was?
Yeah, me either, Ed. It was only last year that I sat here and I thought, I need to look into this jail, because I found out where he had been and, you know, through paperwork and files from my lawyers. And I thought, well, I need to look into this jail. And that's when I come across the journalist that did the documentary on it. And I listened to it.
Okay, so describe what's going on with these jails.
Well, the funny thing about it was when I was listening to it, the documentary, it goes for a few hours, they actually not mention my father by name, but they do mention him. And they also mention my sister because they were running experiments in the jail. I don't know what my sister had to do with it. And I did reach out to the journalist that did that documentary. He wanted me to send him any files I had, and I didn't at the time because I was going through a court case, and this was a part of it. And he dropped me like a hotcake at the end of it and didn't want to talk to me. I guess he realised he had the real deal, and he, maybe was told to back down from it. I don't know. I haven't heard from him since.
Okay, so you mentioned your lawyers. What can you describe? What's the litigation about?
That was to do with charges relating back historically to what happened to me within the family dynamics.
So you were suing a member of your family?
Yes. And then I found out, all about my dad and a lot more than what I had to find out back in 2000.
Gotcha. Now, what was the disposition of that case? Settlement?
Sorry. At the end of it?
Yeah, was there a settlement? And how'd you...
There was a settlement, and I feel very railroaded. I'm still getting over the trauma from that on top of everything else. I was sort of led up a garden path with this law firm, and it was a bit of a rude awakening. I thought they were they had my good interests at heart, and I kept faith in them, and I probably should not have done that. I trusted too much in them doing the right thing by me.
I hear you. I'm a private investigator, do a lot of civil litigation, criminal defense investigation, and it first of all, it's just exhausting. The whole thing is grueling, and your relationship with the plaintiff, it can become contentious, because everyone is so passionate and involved in it, and it just drags on and on and on forever, and everybody just wants to get the damn thing over with. But I got to tell you, Casey, there's cases out there, okay, where the plaintiffs are being taken advantage of, man. Like a lot of these Epstein settlements, man. There's people having these plaintiffs sign agreements that they become executors of their estate, okay, when they sign the retainer agreement, okay? So there's some real shadiness going on out there. I don't know what your situation was.
It's all about the dollar, the mighty dollar.
Yeah.
At the end of it. Not about justice. And I do hope, the likes of, my dear friend Richard Kerr, I hope that's not happening to him, and I do hope he does get justice. He deserves it very much so, like many other people. But unfortunately, the system stinks, and it stinks to high heaven.
I totally agree with you there. Now, what about, you mentioned that they were doing experiments inside the prison. What was going on there?
They were trying to, I believe, eradicate homosexuality.
Okay. And then what was the nature of these experiments?
I'm not too sure on the type of therapy. I know the therapy that they used on my sister was with electric shock. And back in the day, they didn't sedate them, unfortunately, and she went through sheer hell. And if you listen to the podcast, they actually mention my sister. My sister's moaning. They're trying to arouse her, and they mention her name.
Now, this is because your sister was homosexual and they put her in this prison?
No. She was used as a prostitute from a young age onwards, and she was then labelled schizophrenic, which they did back then. instead of actually looking at what was actually happening to her and finding out. They just prefer to label and put them on the shelf, and they started experimenting on her because she became a ward of the state.
So your sister was sex trafficked as a young child, and their response to that was to throw her in prison and do experiments on her.
No, she wasn't even in the prison.
Wasn't in the prison.
And that's what I want. That was one of the questions I had to ask this journalist that did the documentary. What did that lady have to do with the jail?
Did he ever answer you?
No, he never did, and I showed him a snippet of evidence that the man that he was referring to in the documentary, one of them, happened to be my father, and I had the medical evidence. And the second question was, what did the lady that he was, it was a pre-recording back in the day, and doctors were doing surgery on her. And he never did answer me.
Where is your sister today?
She's passed away since.
Okay.
She was in institutions throughout Australia, all of them. There wasn't one I don't think that she was in. I do believe maybe the connection here is the psychiatrists that were doing these experiments in the jail were also the same psychiatrists involved with my sister.
Really?
In a psychiatric hospital, yes.
Have you? So, and what do you think? Have you heard of like MK Ultra program? Have you heard of that?
Yes, I have.
So then, what do you think? Do you think this is that type of thing?
I don't really know. They just experimented on her using all different drugs. They had free rein with her because she became under the. They classed her under the Master of Lunacy Act, and they could do whatever they wanted with her. They didn't have to answer to any parent. She became a ward of the state.
Right.
So they experimented on her. I do not know what it was really all about. Why? And she was far from schizophrenic. She was actually telling the truth, and nobody listened.
When's the last time? When did she pass away?
She passed away now, I want to say 5-6 years ago.
Okay, so then was she ever emancipated or allowed to go free? Or she was always in custody?
She was always under the Mental Health Act in Australia. The funny thing was she had no rights then, but when she returned, she reached the age of elderly. She went under the Elderly Age Act.
Right. And
health had nothing to do with her very much anymore except her medication. They dropped her like a hotcake.
Now,
and all of a sudden, she had rights.
Now, what about in Australia now? Do these laws still exist where they can just experiment on people with mental illness?
I'm not too sure, Ed, whether they ask you to consent these days or not, how they operate. I would shudder to think that they still do what they used to do.
Hey, you'd think we've gotten a little more civilized, right?
Yeah, one would hope.
You took the words right out of my mouth there. One would hope, right? Now, what about your father? Were they doing experiments on him in there too as well?
I believe so, but they found out, I've read in the files that he wasn't, they couldn't rehabilitate him in any way, shape or form. Nothing, no therapy was working on him.
And what about the other, you mentioned that he was involved in a ring with a bunch of people. Were they brought to justice?
Yes.
Yeah, they were.
No, they still haven't. And since two that I know of have passed away, they were lucky enough not to be prosecuted for any of their atrocities that they committed against children. I do believe there's two more that are still alive. I'm not too sure on it, And if they are, well, again, they'll get away with that too.
Now, what about your mother throughout all this? Was she around, involved?
Yes, and that was another thing. I didn't have a very close relationship when I was growing up with her, and most of the time I was with her because everybody else was in and out of the house. My sister was in psychiatric hospitals in and out, and of course my father was gone, and I know where now. So I grew up with her, and as I got to find this all out in the last 20-odd years, she was quite aware of what her husband was doing. She even allowed it to happen to her own son, who was killed when he was 23. So she was very, very much aware, and it didn't matter to her. She still kept the relationship with my father.
And how was it? She tried what?
Out of jail. Tried keeping him out of, getting him out of jail when he was jailed back in the 60s. She begged and begged, and I've got so many files on her begging the jail system to release him. And yet he was in there with committed atrocities against her own son.
And the 23-year-old, how did he die?
He was run off the road and hit a tree. It was put down to people unknown and that it was an accident, but I've since found out over the years that it was no accident and he was deliberately run off the road.
How did you get involved with Richard Kerr?
Funny thing, there was another lady that was a friend to Richard and found out that she was not really a friend to him, and we started speaking, and we found that we had a lot of things in common, and we just clicked from there and have become very good friends over the last few years. Richard actually come and stayed with us for a period of time, and yeah.
So now you're familiar with the Richards case, where there was espionage involved and all of that. Do you think there was any of this, any of that type of thing going on with your father and this pedophile ring and blackmail kind of stuff?
I can't say it's for fact, but I do believe there was a secret service involved. There's too many coincidences pointing in that direction, but to have it confirmed, I haven't as of yet.
And this is U.S. Secret Service or Australian Secret Service?
It would have been Australia.
Okay, then how do you think they were involved? And describe that to us.
Well, I think they realised who they had when they had him in jail, and I was reading a file not so long ago where he was supposed to be deported. As I'd mentioned, he should have been, and they did not deport him because he was too much of an asset to the prison. His service and it states his services were of greater value. I'm not too sure what that means.
Well, so there's a quote from the report that his service was of great value in the prison?
Yes, of greater value, yes. And he was supposed to be then transferred to another prison, and the same wording, greater value. So hence he didn't get deported, and hence he didn't get transferred.
But what was his employment history again? He said he managed a gas station that did something about transporting handicapped kids?
Yes, he managed service stations. He was sort of a jack of all trades. Funny enough, very highly educated. He come from Germany. He'd been through the Second World War through the Hitler Youth. And I look back now and it's almost like the second Hitler coming to pretend to be Hitler in Australia. That's what he played. And a very charming, charismatic, nice man. If you were to meet him, you would almost say, I love this man. He's amazing.
What about him? Was he a wealthy man?
He had his days, but not. He did require a lot of American, we call them yank tanks, right? The big old cars. And I remember growing up in my childhood, we had many of those. My dad had them. And he drove around them, and you can imagine in a little country town, here comes this man he looked like he'd come from a mafia, and he's driving this big Dodge Phoenix vehicle in a little country town. He must have stood out like, yeah.
So he at least had the appearance of being a wealthy man in that town.
Yeah. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Well, then wouldn't you think it would be logical that he got that money from sex trafficking? Was he sex trafficking your sister?
Yes, he was. Yes, he was lending her out to men. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Well, then, yeah, that would make sense. He would be of service to the police and the prison system. I mean, if he was an informant, if he had blackmail dirt on a bunch of people in town, right?
Yeah. Well, I don't know about that specific town, but because he was always away from home, he was on and off. Sometimes he was there and other times he wasn't there. And I never knew growing up where he was, and I didn't worry about it. Eventually, as I grew older in years, I didn't question anything. And I was very naive to everything. I trusted in the people that said they were my parents.
Yeah, you and I are the same age, so things were different back then. I could totally see that. So you never suspected your parents of doing anything like this back in those days. Yeah.
Never, ever.
Yeah, we had no internet. There weren't movies and stuff about this back in those days. So there was no way to know, even know this existed.
Yeah, yeah. And as much as I loved my dad dearly, when this came about, there's no way I could turn my back and turn a blind eye to what he'd done. And unfortunately, I've learned a lot more. And as I said before, I can't ask him any more questions because he's no longer here. So unfortunately, that's the way it ends.
Now, what about his friends, his co-conspirators in these crimes? Did they live a wealthy lifestyle? Do you know?
I'm not too sure. I know two of them that passed away were reasonably well off, and the others I cannot speak about whether they are or they aren't.
Gotcha. Now, and back to this prison for homosexuals. Now, the people were arrested just for being homosexual and put in prison? Or were they all sex offenders?
I believe so. Yes. Down to just going to a public toilet. And, of course, I will tell you many a time I sat outside public toilets in a car waiting, and I never knew what that was about. I thought they were just going to the toilet. And I'd sit there, and, again, as I grew up, I didn't question any of that. I just put it behind me. But now I know what was going on in those public toilets. But, yes, they would get arrested. They'd get caught by trying to attempt to have sexual contact with somebody in the toilet as well. Or they would meet in there. They had their park toilets that they were familiar with.
Yeah. So your dad would take you to the park. He'd go into the public restroom, and you would wait in the car. No,
one of his friends that were in the pedophile ring used to do that.
With you?
And I would his car. Yes, I'd be always with him in his car. Yes.
Okay, so then even as a child, so you didn't know, you knew some of these pedophiles before your father went to prison. Okay.
Oh, yeah, I grew up with most of them, yes. Wow. I grew up with them. I just thought they were family friends, how your parents have friends.
Yeah.
And, of course, working in the service station business. Sometimes there was one of them that worked in the service station business as well. So and that was up and down the east coast of Australia. My dad had service stations. He used to. They had a porn magazine called King's Cross Whispers back in the day, and my father used to have those delivered to from different service stations.
Was this homosexual porn or heterosexual?
Yes, it was all sorts of porn, both. And they run ads in the actual in the papers, and they had their coding, and that's the way they kept in contact back in the day.
But they had a whole prison system, a whole justice system to go after homosexuals, but not to take down this pedophile, right?
No. And I do believe the contacts that he made to form this pedophile ring when they got outside were from that jail.
Right.
So they weren't just, gay men. There were also children, child molesters as well in this jail system. And the funny thing about it, I was told that my father almost run that jail at one stage. He was given jobs within the prison system that were very trusted.
Like what?
One was a medical orderly. He had the keys to all the inmates, where if they got sick in the middle of the night, it was like a 24/7. And he was also the head librarian. And he worked in the pharmacy at one stage. So he was very well respected in there, I guess.
Yeah, those are all prime. Yeah, those are all prime prison jobs. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No, you were saying too that there were no children there in this prison, though, right?
No, not unless you class. Well, to me, 18 years of age is jail age in Australia.
Yeah.
I still class that as pretty much a young adolescent, just coming out of childhood virtually. They're still not an adult.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And I do know one of the men that were in that prison with my father was groomed by my father. And he was only 18 at the time.
Now, what about when your father was negotiating his sentence here for the plea deal, the guilty plea? Was there any indication that he was giving up information on other co-defendants or other conspirators, ratting people out?
No, he was very, very tight-lipped. He kept secrets very, very well. He actually, when he was arrested, I was there. I got a call from the detectives that they had arrested him at the airport and they were taking him in and for me to come. So I did, and I picked up his baggage, his luggage, and I spent probably an hour with my father in an interview room. And at that point in time, he didn't know everything that was happening with him and who was involved in putting him where he was. And he gave me some information to give to one of these pedophiles, and there were some codes in that, and I worked that out later on over the years. Had I said to this person what he wanted me to relay to him, it would have given him straight away to shut down. Don't mention anymore.
Gotcha. Okay, well, a couple of questions for you. First of all, when you come to the decision that you're going to turn in your father, how old were you?
I was 39.
And then how did you go about this? You just picked up the phone and called the police? You went down to the police station?
I said, I've got a story to tell. And at that point in time, I was in Germany with my father, and the last few weeks that I had to stay with my father before I could get a flight, I had to cut my trip back home short. And I found out there that what my father had done, and I still had to stay with him. at that point of time. And then I got a flight back to Australia, and as soon as I got back, I rang the detectives and told them I had a story to tell. I also got his keys to his apartment, and I looked for every bit of evidence I could. I also had to, funny enough, I had to deal with a lot of people in the community, a lot of women, elderly women. One of them in particular had my father's keys. He entrusted her with them, and she was removing evidence from his apartment, and I sort of did threaten her that if she didn't give me the keys, I would have her place raided. And she quickly gave over the keys, and I went back and I found the evidence my father was telling her to get and put into her place of residence, so the police wouldn't find it, which actually busted another pedophile ring.
Yeah, so your dad, it wasn't just other men that were also raping children. He had other people in the community were assisting this ring.
Yes, yeah. Well, they were assisting him, women. And the funny thing, Ed, was he was a radio announcer.
Your father was?
Yeah, seriously, yes, he was. And he had such a big fan base, it wasn't funny. The women were just head over heels.
Yeah, they fall in love with your voice. Yeah. Okay.
Was just
now the victim in this case. Did the victim, the child victim, little boy, have to go to the police and tell his story too as well?
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. Yeah, and that was very hard on him.
Yeah.
He was in his last year of high school, pretty much, and that destroyed his. He's now, in his 30s, and he's actually getting his career together now. It's taken him so long.
Yeah, we deal with a lot of people on the show who've been through this kind of trauma. It's very difficult,
Yeah, it is not easy. It devastated my entire family.
Now, but then you said something before that when the police arrested him, now you're a witness against your father, right? You're a potential witness at least.
Yes.
But when they arrested him, they took you and interrogated him with you in the room?
No, they didn't interrogate him. They let me visit with him in an interview room.
Oh.
Because he was giving me his luggage and his baggage from his trip from overseas because they arrested him. They flagged his passport, and they were going to go over and pick him up, but he come back on his own reconnaissance. So, and I got to speak to him prior.
Did he know at that point you would turn him in?
No, he wasn't. He didn't know. No. They also set up they instigated a phone call from Australia to Germany, and I had to ask certain questions to my father, and one was regarding my brother also because, like I said to you, he was put down that it was an accident, car accident, but it was not an accident at all. My father was involved, and some of the people that he knew were involved in that as well.
Do you think that murder was to keep him quiet from talking about the same kind of thing? Yeah.
Yes. My brother was 9 when my father got his hands on him, and he groomed him all the way up until he was 23.
And was he about to talk about it or something like that, or confront his father?
I believe so. He had a few last words on his before the ambulance lifted him into the ambulance. People lifted him into the ambulance. He was still coherent to a degree, and one of the things that he said was he didn't do it, and I'm still not too sure on what he didn't do.
Your brother said that your brother didn't do it.
Yeah, he said I didn't do it.
Oh, that's interesting. I wonder what he's talking about. Well, what do you think he was talking about?
I don't know what they were blaming him for doing, but it would have been not nice for my brother to be in the condition he was in, and he's telling the truth on his deathbed. he only had minutes left to live.
Now, you said your father gave you a coded message. What was that coded message?
Oh, I don't know whether I should speak about that.
Oh, really? Why?
I don't know. I just never have mentioned it.
Okay.
But they had a particular name for the jail, the prison in Cooma that they were in.
Yeah.
And once you heard that, you knew then that's it. No more conversation.
Gotcha. Okay, I get it now. It was just like a coded word, name of a prison, and once it was like a safe word. Like once you say that, hey, burn out all the evidence, right? Hit the road. All right.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now what about when did your father find out that you're the one that turned him in? There must have been a day. And was there a conversation?
I think when he got the recording of me going off my brain at him, they wanted me to tell him what I thought. So I did. And they played it to him when he was first put into jail. So he then learnt that, yeah.
So at that period of time, did he contact you and say, Casey, what's going on?
No, he wasn't allowed to.
Yeah, he wasn't allowed. Sure,
he still wasn't allowed to contact me in that last year, but I guess he didn't care. He got out on parole because he was dying, and they didn't want him in jail dying, so they let him out, and he had to see his parole officer every week, I believe.
And what was that first phone call like when he contacted you? Was hard. But I had to say to myself, I forgive him in the sense that I forgive him for what happened to him as a child growing up. And I understand that. But as I told him, I can't forgive him for what he did. There's no excuse. Even though I understand what happened to him that led him down that pathway, he still knew right from wrong. So, Casey, you've had a really difficult life. Your father going to prison.
Not siblings.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Yeah. I said not as bad as my siblings. They had it a lot worse.
But, yeah, right. But, you lost your brother, you lost your sister. Your father winds up in prison, your child. What about yourself? Have you been through therapy? How do you get through this? How do you... I think I would have jumped.
There were times where, 22 years ago, before I just come to America, I didn't have a future, and I contemplated not being here any longer. And there has been times over the years, as I said, it devastated my entire family. And that's been hard in itself. It's been very traumatic. And I still am undergoing treatment now.
Well, that's good. Now, and what motivates you to want to tell this story?
I just want other people to know that, don't contemplate doing anything silly if you're going through something similar. There is light at the end of that tunnel. You can get through it. And to speak out, to speak up, whether justice in my case, I don't think it was really done to a degree. And it got swept back under the carpet again, and that's why I'm talking to you, because you have a good platform to get these things out so people know that these things happened and possibly still happening, who knows. But the more people that do stand up and talk about it, the more we get educated and we can change things.
I don't know, Casey, I've done this kind of show so many times. I don't know what we're changing. I don't know what we're helping anymore. I got to tell you the truth. I really don't know, if we're doing any good at all,
Well, they say, Ed, that the good prevails at the end of the day, and we have more good than we do bad. And we have to keep thinking that what we put out to the universe is what we reap back, right?
That is true. Yeah, what you focus on, you will wind up in. Yeah.
Got to try and look at the children of today and the future children, you know, that are growing up in this world. We have to try and speak out to change things. If we don't, we're just as bad as the perpetrators.
Yeah. So what is going on with Richard's case now?
Well, I do believe he still has his case with the High Court, and it's still ongoing. They seem to kick that tin down the road so often. Ever since I've spoken to Richard and known him, it's just ongoing, and there doesn't seem to be an end in sight. And I do hope he does get justice. I really do. I hope his law firm is a lot better than what my law firm was.
Yeah, once you get involved in the intelligence community, is on the opposition, it's an uphill battle, man. You know, it's an uphill.
Yeah, it's a big thing to be entrapped in a law case too.
Yeah,
and I, for Richard's sake, I hope that's not the case.
I hear you.
So it does happen to so many. I'm not the only one that it happened to. It happens to a lot of people, and unfortunately, that is the system and the way they operate. They're just as corrupt as far as I'm concerned.
There's a lot of corruption, that's for sure. So we only got a couple of minutes left. Is there something you want to leave us with?
Just to not give up, you know, keep plodding along. If there's similar things that you are experiencing today and within your own family, don't give up. Keep doing the good work and getting it out there. Let people know.
Well,
the more people that know, the more educated we can become.
Casey Gates, I thank you so much for coming on the show. The audience, at first, I thought I was going to be talking to a man today when I saw the name Casey. So when she gets on the phone, I found out she's a woman. And then by the end of the show, she's become my therapist, trying to talk me out of suicide over here. So, Casey, thank you so much, man.
You're welcome, man. Thank you.
No,
I
thank you, too.
You.
And I encourage the audience to go back and search for the old shows, Richard Kerr. Richard Kerr. We've done about 3 hours with Richard himself. Then another fellow that wrote a book about him. And we've done several shows about the Kinkora School for Boys. And we've done a ton of shows on that, about 10. What a scandal that was, man.
Yeah, definitely. It's just amazing that Richard's still standing. He's a strong man, though, very strong, highly intelligent man. And they just shaft him along.
Yeah, he's been to hell and back, that kid, you know, yeah.
He has. And that's the sad part about it. But the thing is, he's out there. He's letting the people know that it may be historical and happened a long time ago, naturally, but unless we speak about these things, people do not get educated on what's happened and what's possibly still happening.
Yeah. So definitely, check out the old shows with Richard Kerr, Kinkora School for Boys with a K, and intelligence involved in that, blackmail, all kinds of crazy stuff, and totally covered up, man. Totally covered up. Casey Gates, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ed. I appreciate you, and have a good rest of your day.
You too. Good night.